I'm Danno.
I'm Antonio.
And I'm Gordon.
And this is the Basement Roadshow AV Club. We watch things and talk about them. It's like a book club, but no one secretly wants to suggest that 50 Shades is next. We have made it to the end of Arrow Season 1, and here are our thoughts.
I mean, I'm not nobody, I'm someone, obviously, and so are you. You're Laurel, right? That Laurel? Gorgeous Laurel.
This is Felicity.
Felicity, hold on to me tight.
I imagined you saying that under different circumstances. Very platonic circumstances. Yes! Wow, I really do that.
So tell me, are you ready to die?
If I've learned anything as a successful businessman, it's redundancy.
Oliver and Laurel finally get together in episode 22, as Ollie realizes the mission his father had for him was to stop the undertaking, and then he can have a normal life again. Now, he probably should have actually stopped the undertaking before running to hook up with Laurel, though. Do you feel this part of the story was a bit rushed or thrown together?
I do have a couple issues with this part of the story where Oliver's like, hey, I can be a normal person again and I can go have sex with Laurel. One, the fact that he told Tommy essentially like, you need to get back with Laurel, and then 8 minutes and 40 seconds of episode runtime later, he went and planted his flag. That's kind of fucked up. That's kind of a shitty friend thing to do. It paints this weird picture of what Ollie is aside from his crusade. I'm going to be noble in taking down these evil people, but also I'm going to take what I want to. Fuck my friends and fuck everything else. Also, an issue that I have with his whole thought process of stop the undertaking, live normal life, get the girl, is that we've been gearing up to Oliver being the catch-all stop crime vigilante as opposed to just taking care of his crusade, just for him to have this thought, once I finish this one mission, I'm going to get to hang up the hood, I'm going to get to live my normal life, I'm going to get my rewards, but every single arrow is pointing in the opposite direction.
So my thought on that is, well, I guess a couple things here. Number one, I do think it probably feels a lot more abrupt now that we're coming into this with Arrow having run multiple seasons. I don't remember it feeling that way at the time when I watched it when it was coming out, but I definitely feel that way now. It's one of those things too where it feels especially jarring because like what they're trying to plot out here. Season 1 still very much approaches Laurel as like she's the end game for Oliver and everything else is kind of a distraction. There's always Oliver in the background. Episode 22 feels like a resolution on that of Oliver realizing that like, yeah, you know, he still loves Laurel and he's going to go get the girl he wants, even though he's also being a shitty friend to Tommy in that process. And then of course we know that, spoiler alert, season 2 starts off and Laurel kind of becomes a jerk after Tommy dies and she has her own problems that she's dealing with, and then it feels like it kind of resets. So I think that's kind of lends it to this whole thing feeling very like haphazard because it kind of feels like it was written without them knowing what they were going to do yet with season 2.
While the season's present day plot wraps up in a huge climax, the flashback plot ending doesn't feel very climactic to me, outside of Yao Fei's death. What did you think about the resolution to the flashback storyline?
Well, I felt that it was interesting that in episode 21, we get a deviation from the normal flashbacks that we've been getting to see Oliver and his father before they go on the trip. And we see sort of the foundations of the undertaking being laid. And while I appreciate that they tried something different, I feel like ultimately that didn't really add anything to the story, which I think may be part of the reason why when we finally get to the resolution of this part of the flashback, it seems to just sort of happen very quickly. For me, it was, compared to what happens in present day, just very underwhelming.
Yeah, I think this is another one of those instances where knowing a little bit in your mind what happens afterwards kind of diminishes it, because that section of flashbacks where they focus on sort of the backstory before they go on the trip, like it's very focused towards the plot that's happening in season and it has no bearing whatsoever on any sort of long-term plot implications. Like, it's very focused on, like, cool, the undertaking, and then after the undertaking is done, we're never going to give a shit about this again. And I think that creates that problem. Whereas in later seasons, I think they try to do more, if I recall, to, like, build towards that long-term plot and to, like, lay those seeds. This very much felt like, well, hopefully we get picked up for another season.
I'll agree with kind of some of those sentiments. In my opinion, after the missile explodes, everything's on fire, Shadow's nowhere to be found, Slade is down and not getting up anytime soon. That kind of implies that there's going to be like, excuse my video game language, but like a final boss fight about to happen. There's going to be a showdown between Fires and Oliver, and depending on how you look at it, it doesn't really pan out that way in most viewpoints. But the fact that Oliver does take out Fires with a single arrow, has the confidence to do so, starts building towards the fact that Oliver had the confidence to shoot Fires in the neck, one shot, no second guessing himself, does show a buildup of character to Oliver and shows what he's going to start to become through the flashback sequences. It shows the definitive start to him being the arrow, where everything before was Oliver's the second/third set of hands while Slade does all the work.
This season ends very abruptly, but I wouldn't quite call it a cliffhanger ending. It's the type of ending you expect in a Shakespearean tragedy. It's tragic for everyone. What do you think about it?
It reminds me of, it's going to be really dumb, but like almost every Gundam anime ends the exact same way, where it's just like a bunch of bad stuff happens and everyone's life looks really miserable, and then it's just like roll credits. And I don't mind it, but man, I would have been really upset if that was the only season of Arrow they ended up making, because like that would not have been a satisfying ending at all. I think as an ending on its own, I think it works fairly well, and it doesn't tie up everything with a neat bow, and it gives some room for the season to go, and like there's some challenges that have been introduced. Where we're going to take this, which is, I think, good for a first season of a show that is getting a second season, you know?
I think they started to wrap it up nice with a bow, where they show, hey, Lance shuts down the earthquake machine, Oliver takes down Malcolm, everything looks like it's good, the day looks like it's going to be saved, and then Malcolm reveals his redundancy, and that's kind of when everything goes to shit. The Glades does end up getting partially destroyed. We do see that Tommy dies. It kind of feels like almost that episode was written with them being unsure whether or not they were going to get that second season, and they kind of option selected towards adding the additional part with the redundancy once they're like, oh, we got season 2. All right, we're going to fuck everything up. You know, we're gonna destroy some lives and, you know, make this I can't even say a Pyrrhic victory, because Malcolm does sort of pretty much win, to set up the character dramas and the losses that occur and will affect season 2.
Yeah, and I don't think any other season of Arrow ends quite like this one does. Now, I haven't seen some of the later seasons, but if I'm thinking back to what I remember of seasons 2, 3, 4, and I think even 5 I've seen, none of them quite end in such a, I guess the word is, depressing way.
I mean, I'm actually been rewatching the show, and yeah, as far as seasons 2 and 3, definitely they don't end so poorly for the characters.
It's poor for the characters, but I like it as an ending because of that tragedy that it leaves us with. But I do agree with Gordon that because there's tragedy, we got to see what happens next. So overall, how did you feel about the season?
It's really interesting to go back to this, because when I think about this modern wave of superhero shows, Arrow was kind of the first one, really. Before we got the Netflix Marvel, before we get this slew of Disney Plus shows that are going to, it was just this humble little CW funded show about a superhero that no one gives a crap about. And I think in that sense, it's kind of cool to see where everything started. On the same side, I don't necessarily think that this show has aged as well as it could have, because there's been so many other like higher budget productions that have come out since then, especially things like Daredevil in particular. It's kind of like, well, wow, like 13 episodes and like twice the budget really does make a difference. But I think it's still overall, like, it holds up okay, and it's still an enjoyable watch if you're like a fan of superheroes, a fan of comic books, and a fan of the genre.
Like you said, I do think that it did pretty well for what it was. I think at the time, we were kind of coming off the Nolan movies. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Batman Begins, Dark Knight, that was about the same time frame. So DC was kind of looking at the darker, grittier look. And I think that Arrow season 1 does accomplish this kind of in the same vein, but it does take it different ways. This was still kind of in the beginning of the full swing of the superhero uprising, and the fact that this was done a bit differently while still kind of in the same vein as the DC offerings, not necessarily the Marvel ones, was kind of an interesting look to see like how many different directions we can take these characters, these plot lines that everybody knows, and just do more with them.
Overall, season 1 of Arrow, really enjoyed it. There are those lines that make us cringe, and then there's those lines that make us smile and laugh. And then there's those lines that do kind of, pull at your heartstrings a little bit. It's an entertaining show. So that's what we thought about Arrow season 1. But what did you think? Let us know in the comments below. And also, let us know your favorite character from the show Arrow. From Basement Roadshow, I'm Danno.
I'm Antonio.
And I'm Gordon.
And this has been the Basement Roadshow AV Club. Join us next time as we'll be watching 50 Shades of Grey.
No, fuck that. Die Hard.
Welcome to the party, pal!
Okay, yeah, Die Hard works. Join us for a very special edition of the Basement Roadshow AV Club as we'll be watching Die Hard.